Today I'm making Aunt Clara a miniature quilted sofa, the perfect start for her little living room. Upstairs, her sewing nook is already full of life, but downstairs it's still a bit bare. Let's begin making this little sofa. To get started, I'm sketching out the front view of the sofa onto graph paper. This will help me make the pattern pieces I'll need later. I only draw half of the sofa to begin with, then I fold the paper in half so the other side mirrors it perfectly, without having to redraw it again. After sketching out the sofa, I cut the shape from the folded graph paper. Once it's unfolded, you can see the full sofa design. I trace this onto plain paper and set that piece aside for later. Next, I cut away one of the arms. At the bottom, I trim off a strip that will become the base of the sofa. Since I forgot to cut the other arm, I fold it back in half and trim again. This way, when I open it up, I've got a mirrored back piece. Now, I have all three of my pattern pieces: the arm, back, and the bottom. Using corrugated cardboard, I trace the back piece twice and the arms 4 times, then cut them all out. Next, I cut some strips of cardboard. These will decide how deep the sofa will be. To make rolling them easier, I add plenty of bends along the strip first. I start the roll around a skewer. I keep rolling until it matches the diameter of the arm's rounded section. I think Aunt Clara would have rewarded herself with a bit of chocolate about now. To finish, I glue down the end and add a couple of pieces of masking tape for extra hold. I glue an arm section to each end of the rolled cardboard, making sure the arms are facing the same way on both sides. Aunt Clara would probably double check both sides were even. She likes things to line up just right. These small pieces are cut to match the width of the roll and the thickness of the arm ends. I glued each one in place between the arms, tucked right under the roll. Here's how the arm section is looking so far. Next, I cut 3 bottom pieces. They're as deep as the arm sections and the same width as the back pattern piece. I glue them together with just enough glue between each layer to hold them in place. To help everything stay secure while the glue dries, I add masking tape along the front and the back edges. The tape also helps cover the holes in the corrugated cardboard. I start by gluing one of the arm sections in place. To make the joint stronger, I use narrow strips of paper. Each one is glued so that half sits on the arm and half on the seat base. Then I flip the piece over and repeat the same step on the underside, adding more strips half on the arm and half on the bottom. This helps everything lock together securely. Aunt Clara would be pleased with these extra little reinforcements. She's all about making sure it's secure, especially since she'll be the one sitting on it. I glue the 2 back pieces together, then check the fit to make sure there aren't any gaps. Once it looks good, I glue the back in place, keeping it flat and aligned. Just like with the arms, I add paper strips for extra strength, one along the back and one on the front. Now this little sofa is almost ready for upholstery, and it should be starting to look like the drawing you made at the very beginning. To create a slight angle for the sofa back, I cut a couple of long, slender wedges of cardboard. These not only give the back its tilt, but also add support so it won't curve inward. Another option is to glue a strip of cardboard near the base, which also helps create that angle. I ended up cutting one more back piece, since I realized I needed the extra layer. You can see the angle of the back here. Aunt Clara would probably say the angle makes it a bit comfier to sit back and relax, but don't glue it in yet. Just set it aside for now. Next, I cut a piece of cardstock the same width as the sofa arm. I added a little notch so that it would lay flat over the arm. While it was in place, I marked just under the outside of the arm and trimmed it off there. Clara would be pleased. She always likes when pieces fit together nice and clean. I'm especially excited about this next part. The fabric will give it that quilted, cozy look that feels just right for Aunt Clara's living room. I think it would be perfectly fine if some of the printed fabric is on a larger scale. Once it's cut into small pieces, you'll really just notice the colors coming through, not that the print was too big. Plus, Clara would probably say it's the colors dancing together that matter the most. I cut the fabric into shorter, skinny strips and played around with the order until I liked how they looked together. Then I started sewing the rows. I enjoy hand sewing because I find it really therapeutic, but you can absolutely use a machine if you prefer. Clara would definitely claim hand stitching gives it more charm, although she never turns down the opportunity to use her machine. These two smaller sections will work nicely for the arms. I intentionally didn't want mine to match. To give them a handmade quilt appearance, I used a couple strands of embroidery floss and added running stitches across the top. I even mixed in a few different thread colors for extra charm. Clara just fell in love with the mismatched arms and thought it made it even more special. I started by cutting the bottom pattern piece from cardstock. After checking the fit, I glued it to the fabric and folded the raw edges in. I went with this blue polka dot fabric for a fun touch. Then I glued the piece onto the front of the sofa, folding the raw edges over onto the seat area and the bottom. Next, I cut a couple of rectangular pieces to cover the arm ends on the back. After that, I snipped little notches all around the fabric and glued them over onto the arm for a smooth finish. Clara loves the way polka dots can brighten a room. These two pieces are for the arms, and the larger one is for the back. I made each one just a little bigger to allow for folding over. To soften the arms, I added some leftover quilt batting. If you don't have batting, you can probably use a few layers of paper towels or felt. It just won't look quite as fluffy. I glued the batting to the cardstock arm piece and trimmed it to fit, and then I centered the fabric over the top. I decided the quilt strips would look nicest running vertically on the arms. From there, it's a matter of folding, gluing, trimming, and clipping the fabric to ease it into place. If any of the seams start to come undone, you can always add a few stitches to secure them. I found that Aleene's Fast Grab glue really helped hold down some of the trickier spots. And don't forget to glue the fabric to the correct side for each arm. Using a generous amount of Aleene's Fast Grab glue, I attached the quilt arm pieces to the sofa arms. I held each one in place for a bit to make sure it was secure. You may not want your arms as fluffy as mine. In that case, paper towel or felt will work too. Just something to soften them up a little bit. Clara says there's never too much fluff when it comes to comfort. Now for the quilted back. The process is pretty much the same as the arms. I kept the quilt pattern running in the same direction and added an extra layer of batting for softness. I started by folding the fabric over the bottom edge first. You can see here that one of the seams had come loose, so I added a little glue and pressed it down before it had a chance to spread even more. Next, I clipped the curved areas, folded them over, and glued them in place on each side. This part was a little tricky because of the seams in the fabric. For now, I'm only folding over the bottom and the curved sides. I added a little glue to each of the supports, and then I pushed the back sofa cushion into place. Don't worry, it's a snug fit, but that's what you want. Once it's in, I trimmed away some of the extra fabric. Not too much, though. You want to leave enough to fold over easily. I started folding and gluing at the center. Here you can see the stitching had spread too far for glue to help, so I added a couple of stitches to secure it. Since this section curves, I clipped the fabric in a few spots to help it ease in better as I glued it down. Clara would remind us to take our time here. The curves might be fiddly, but patience makes all the difference. To finish off the unfinished areas, I cut a couple of strips of cardstock to fit that unfinished area under the arm. And for the optional bottom cover, I traced the sofa shape onto cardstock. And this piece here is actually the one we set aside earlier. I trimmed the arms off of it to make a back panel, then cut a fresh one from cardstock. I also cut two arm shapes using the original arm pattern. I covered the arms with the blue polka dot fabric and glued them onto the front of the sofa arms. Then I covered the strips under the arms and glued them into place. Next, I used a generous amount of glue to attach the back panel. If you'd rather, you can skip trimming the arms off and just use the whole trace piece instead. Finally, if you'd like, you can use that bottom cover to finish it off, though it won't really be visible once the sofa is in place. For the seat cushion, I cut a piece of foam board to the size I needed. Corrugated cardboard would work too. Just like with the back and arm pieces, I layered it with batting and fabric, and then folded the edges over, and then glued the cushion onto the sofa. And that completes the upholstery. Here's how mine turned out. For the feet, I used these little paper quilt shapes, but beads would work just as well. Just make sure they aren't too tall. It would be okay to stop here, but for Clara, I felt like it needed a little something extra, so I added a small ruffle around the bottom edge. Lace would look very cute too. Clara thought the little ruffle was the perfect finish to this cozy little sofa. I forgot to record it, but I also made some fabric piping. You could use crochet thread instead, and I glued it around the arms and the back of the sofa for a neat finish. Here's how the sofa looks in Aunt Clara's living room. She's pleased to finally have a comfy spot to sit, but says the room is still looking a little bare. There will be plenty more details to come, so I hope you'll join us again as her cozy home continues to take shape. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.